about vanda orchid care, and most exactly I will talk about how to grow vanda orchids in glass vases, and at the end of the video I will talk about how I grow my vanda in that basket. You know, I have one that is potted in orchiata bark in a wood basket. At the first of the video I wanted to talk about some general things about vandas, because that is also very important before we get to the actually glass vase method. Vandas are monopodial orchids. That means that each leaf grows up from the stem of the plant, and she does produce sometimes cakeys from the sides, from the stem, but that only appears when a vanda is quite mature. So apart from that, you can find vanda orchids in all the colors, and I have recently seen a few that are absolutely gorgeous and I really want to have, so I hope I will get them. I will show to you a few pictures of some of them which I really like. Now vandas do differ a bit in between them in the conditions they require to properly grow and bloom. We have the species, we have the hybrids, there are some Ascosenda hybrids. Now I think that all of them are put in the vanda category, but in the past they were differentiated, and that for example an Ascosenda can bloom a lot easier and needs a lot less sun, and they usually have smaller blooms, while the proper vandas do have bigger foliage. They do require a lot more sun, and yeah, there are a few conditions, but you can try and look on the RHS Orchid Register page. I will put you a link below, and you can find there a synonym for your vanda orchid. If you have her ID, you can find how she was called in the past, and by doing that you will research what parents she has, and you will find more about her genetics and in what conditions their parents would grow in nature. So you can find quite a lot of things if you do want to make your homework, let's say. Here I have a few ones. For example, this bigger one, it is supposed to require a lot more sunlight because her leaves are a lot bigger. Now my particular one has really funky leaves, but that is how she reached in my collection. I have received her with a super bad spider mite infestation, and now she is all cured, but the damage that the spider mites did on her leaves is permanent. So until the leaves will fall, so that is in a lot of years, she will have those ugly spots, but I'm okay with that. Now she's a bit more sensitive because of those mites. She is very sensitive to sunlight. We can see that I got a sunburn here and one here, and that was in morning sunlight, which should not happen to a vanda. She is still sick, she's still recovering, let's say. This one also needs a lot more sun, and this one as well, but this one, it is a vanda cultana crossed with luzonica fragrance. This one doesn't need as much sunlight because we can see how fast she got all purpley, and yeah, you can check these indicators to see if your vanda needs more or less sunlight. So yeah. About watering, vanda orchids do like to dry out quite well in between waterings, and they like a wet and dry cycle that is quite rapid, and this is what we are trying to mimic in these glass vases. Now of course you can hang your vandas, but then you will have all the roots down, and maybe you don't have a hanging space like I do, so or maybe like I don't and yeah, yeah, this is pretty much how I grow my vandas. Now you should let your vandas soak very well in water to absorb all the water and nutrients that they can. They do have quite thick roots, and that means that or actually the root of the orchid is very thin, but the exterior part, the velamen that you are actually seeing, acts as a sponge, and that retains a lot of water. And if you only dunk it in a bucket for 10 minutes, that won't be enough. So alright, that is about the watering. They are very forgiving about the humidity, so I think somewhere between 30% and 75 to 80% is enough, or it is very well. But what it is actually important for them, it is to be properly hydrated. So I guess if you are watching the stem of the orchid and you are seeing at the base of the leaves some wrinkles, that means they need more water, not that they are not happy about the humidity. The watering method depends on the method of growing, and that is what I will talk a bit later. They do require a lot of light, and you should make sure that you give your vandas bright light without causing sunburn. As we can see, a sick vanda can take a lot less sun than a healthy one, so you should make sure you check the health of the orchid before you are putting her in a very high light location. Now, the younger the orchid is, the less sun she will need, and the bigger the vanda is, the more sun, or what I want to say it is that if your vanda it is a mature one, she can take the proper sunlight, but when they are seedlings they cannot. So I wouldn't put my seedlings in a very strong light. Inside, so indoors, good light should be on a south facing windowsill, but I guess you can really get away if you have big windows as I do, because I only have sunlight in the morning, and my vandas do seem to be okay. Vanda orchids are warm growers, so you should not let them experience pretty coldish conditions, let's say. So a good temperature for them would be in the daytime somewhere between 75 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit, or 24 to 35 Celsius, and in the nighttime somewhere between 60 and 70 Fahrenheit, or somewhere between 16 and 22 Celsius. They can withstand, of course, higher or lower temperatures than that, but I wouldn't really recommend you put your vanda at 50 Celsius nor at 10 Celsius. Although they can resist it, some damage can appear. They are heavy feeders, but the method of fertilizing depends on your particular method of growing. And usually a well-grown vanda, a mature vanda, can flower 2 to 3 times a year, or even more if they have multiple plantlets, let's say. So if the mother plant is very mature and she has cakeys which also reach the maturing size, she can bloom, of course, multiple times a year, more than 3, let's say. Now let's see, you can see that I have more vandas here. We have 4 vandas, and they are all mature except this one. I think this is 1 year from flowering size. You should pay extra some extra attention when you are choosing the glass you want to keep your orchid in, because you want to make sure that it fits correctly the size of your orchid. What you want to do, it is to have the whole plant on top of the glass and only the root part inside it, because the roots will grow very well inside the glass, but if you are keeping the plant or its leaves, let's say, inside, they some fungus diseases can occur, because inside the glass vase it is a lot less air. Now I don't think this method of growing is very different from water culture, and I think there are many methods of growing in water culture. So we have semi-water culture and full water culture. Full water culture, it is or I understand it like you always keep the roots of your orchid in water with a quarter of them, or let's say maybe this amount of water, and in semi-water culture you are putting 3/4 of your roots in water for a specific amount of days, and that depends on the orchid. Let's say we can call this method a sort of semi-water culture hybrid, because I only keep the roots of my orchids or my vanda orchids in water for maximum 10 hours at a time. Sometimes even less, depends what I put in that water. So what I'm applying on the root zone, it is not always the same, but what it is very important, it is that you properly let them dry in between, because if the roots are not completely dry, if you still have a bit of water inside, some bacteria will start to form, and that is not okay at all. So I wouldn't really try to grow vanda orchids in full water culture. And this is because the roots... I will come back in a second, guys. Okay, sorry for that. I heard a bee in my room and in my bedroom, and I really don't know how it got there, because the window was closed. So yeah, I got it out. Okay, what I was saying about the glass vases, yeah, you should always keep your vanda stem on top of the glass, so it has plenty of air movement, so you prevent any rot or any fungus from happening there. You can see that the glass vases do get a bit dirty in time. What I use to clean them, it is a bit of vinegar with water, and I scrub it really well inside, and then I rinse it really well. Now I don't really get worried because the glass gets a bit dirty. When I use water and normal fertilizer, it doesn't really spoils it a lot. But what did make it really dirty, for example, here, it was the fusarium treatment. So the fungicide did left some residues, and also the biofertilizers that I use also spoils it a lot, let's say. But those are very good for roots, and I won't stop using them. About watering, yeah, as I was saying, when I water the orchids, I make sure that the whole root system, but beneath, about 1 centimeter beneath the stem of the plant, it is submerged in water. And that helps my orchid a lot, because I don't risk any type of rot, and I leave the orchids in that water for about 10 hours, so usually overnight. So before I go to bed I put the water, and when I wake up I go and dump it out, and that makes my orchids grow really well. Yeah, this thing about watering your vandas in glass vases, I think it is really easy, but you also need to pay attention to what products you are using. For example, because vandas are heavy feeders, I do tend to fertilize them a lot, so they do get fertilized almost with every watering, and I don't usually, or I don't really use the same concentration and the same products all the time, but I do make sure that they do receive specific types of fertilizers. For example, as a basic fertilizer for my orchids, I use MSU fertilizer, and that helps them grow really well. And when I'm fertilizing them with that, I put about 450 ppm of fertilizer, and I mix it really well, and then I drop the pH to about 5.5. I go that low because overnight I leave them in water, and when you leave water standing, you will see that the pH will tend to slowly rise up. That is a normal thing which happens when you use water, so you can test that yourself and you will actually see what I'm talking about. To drop the pH, I use a substance from Canna. It is called pH Down, and it's based on nitric acid, and that is really safe to use because it is not concentrated, and if you drop a bit on your hand it won't burn, but many of the products on the market do burn will harm yourself if you are not careful. So this is why I prefer to use the Canna product, because it is safe, let's say, if you make some mistakes. To test the pH and the ppm in the water, I use a TDS meter for the ppm and a pH meter for the pH, of course. So I was saying, when I fertilize with MSU, I leave the orchids overnight in it. When I put fertilizer, I never leave them more than 1 hour in that water. And when I put fertilizer, I can also put, when I put fungicide, I can also put fertilizer. When I use fish mix with them, of course I also fertilize them at 450 ppm, but this time I never leave them over 4 hours maximum in that solution, because fish mix, it is a biofertilizer, and you will see if you try to leave that one in your glass vase overnight, the next morning the whole container will smell horrible. So that fertilizer, it is okay, but and it is actually very good because it has all sorts of auxins and cytoxins and plant hormones that it is normal and the orchids do need. It does contain them, but overnight it will kind of get bad, so you don't want to leave them that much. What else did I use? I used a compound biofertilizer which had some, I don't know, extract of worms or something of the sorts. That one was also okay for about 4 hours. And sometimes I do apply plain calcium and magnesium with the water at the same concentration, 450, so 200 from one, 200 from the other. But yeah, it really depends on what I do feel like to apply. If you don't have all these products, do stick to your preferred orchid fertilizer with a pH down, because you do need to buffer the pH. And then I, in the morning time, or when I think it is enough, I will just tilt the glass vase, let the water drip, and put the orchid back in its place. on the windowsill. So yeah, that works really easy for me. The root tips are very happy and healthy, and I will show you a few. I hope you can see. And she also is branching out. This is a very new orchid which I have received from a friend here in Romania, and the orchid did respond very well in my care, because it only had these 3 big roots, and all the new root tips are in my care, appeared in the last month. This is the sick orchid that I was telling about, that a friend gave me. The leaves do look horrible because of the spider mite damage, and when I have received her, she didn't have any root tip, and actually for the past 6 months she didn't grow any roots, but now she is absolutely full of root tips, and this appeared in the last month from when I have put her in a glass vase, because in the past she wasn't in this setup, and just now she is waking up. She is producing new roots and also branches from the old ones. She is even putting up a new root tip on a root that was actually burned. This is a sensitive orchid, but I do like that she is growing now so many roots. I will do my best not to burn them. Here is another example. I have purchased this orchid 1 month and a half ago, I think, and look how many root tips she is producing. I really hope you are able to see through this glass vase, even on the bottom. She does have quite a few. A new one here. I do hope I will get her to rebloom. I'm seeing something. I need to bring. Okay guys, that was from work. So the root tips are very healthy, or the roots are very healthy in glass vases. As you can see, they do enjoy the extra moisture that they have, but also the glass do permits a lot of air exchange, so the roots won't rot in any way. Now, as you can see, for example, this orchid, it is a new acquisition, and she still has the very thin roots, and those should be removed, because when you purchase an orchid, they are usually kept in greenhouses with very high humidity, and those roots are from when the orchid was still a seedling. But usually, from my experience in our care, those roots are not really very viable, and they won't survive for a long amount of time. So I think that what can happen, it is that they will slowly start to die. So when you will see, when you water, you will pretty much see their color, so you can touch them, and if they feel mushy, if they feel hollow, you can safely cut them with a sterilized scissor, and until you will remain only with the thick roots, like in this case or in this one. What else? So I was saying, I usually fertilize at about 450 ppm with different types of fertilizers, and I do make sure that I will leave the orchids with plain water once every 6 to 7 fertilizers, let's say. I do tend to water them differently. So these ones in the front, they do have bigger foliage, they are more mature, they do have a lot more roots, and I can water them a lot less frequent. So I water these three once every 5 days. As I said, usually I leave them overnight in a specific solution, or for 4 hours. But this one, this is a younger orchid. We can see that she does have pretty long, let's say, foliage, but the leaves are very thin. They are not very big, they don't absorb or they cannot store a lot of water, and also the orchid itself, it came to me with a pretty poor root system, so the roots cannot really store enough water. So if I would try to water this orchid once every 5 days, that would be too less. So this one gets watered once every 3 days. And with that, I think I covered pretty much all the aspects that I wanted to talk with you. I do keep some bamboo stakes in here only to try to keep the foliage on top of the glass vase. As I said, I don't want them to stay inside. This one is the only one with her leaves slightly inside the glass vase, but the top of the glass, of the glass vase has a very wide opening, let's say, so plenty of air can enter there. And when I water her, I put water only maximum on I fill up maximum half of the glass, so that works nicely. This is a gorgeous vanda, as you can see. Now I will bring the one in the basket. Okay guys, and here we have the Panda Orchid that it is potted in a basket with orchiata bark and a bit of green moss on top. So about this orchid, you have most probably seen the tutorial when I have built this basket and how I have actually potted her up. And if you haven't seen that one yet, I will put some links in the description of this video and also in the comment section below, so you go and check those out. Also about the green moss, the same situation. This orchid, it is watered once every 7 days, and she is fertilized in the same way once every 7 days, but she gets fertilized 4 times and then flushed with water 1 time. When I water her, I put her in a huge water container, and there I put the same fertilizer as I put on the orchids which are in glass vases. So I put fertilizer at approximately 450 ppm, and after that I leave her to soak overnight for at least 10 hours. Look who is here! Isn't she adorable? She's my little princess. So okay guys, I leave the orchid soak overnight, and because the orchid has a huge root system that absorbs a lot of water, so her roots absorb a lot of water, but also the medium absorbs a lot of water. Now you will say, what your roots of your vanda rot in a basket with medium? So no, orchiata bark, it is a very chunky bark. You can see I used the size super of the orchiata bark, and this one usually decomposes in about 5 to 7 years when it is used like this in a basket. That medium do permits a lot of air exchange, and also the roots of the orchid do stay completely wet for 1 day and a half, and then she is kind of moist for 1 more day, and then she stays completely dried for the rest of the days. So when once every 7 days I do water her again. And I have potted her while she was in bloom. We can see that no roots have died, and also the orchid, it is very well hydrated. Sometimes once every 2 to 3 days I do spray a bit of water on top of the moss just to keep it green and happy, and so far so good. I don't see it dying. Now on top of it you can see some medium. This is the medium which usually starts to float when I put her in water because here in between the stakes of the basket the medium can get out. We can just see it now. So yeah, that is what is happening. I don't know what else to say about this, guys. So reflowering this orchid, it is not the easiest thing in the world, let's say. What you need to do it is to properly fertilize the orchids, as I just explained to you, but you also need to provide them quite a lot of sunlight, and that depends on your particular location. For example, in UK it is a bit harder to bloom them. I live in Romania and here we do get quite a lot of sunlight, but not in the winter time, so I might choose to put some artificial light on them in the winter time. I will see then. And it really depends on how the orchids react in my environment. I don't really know, because I have just moved in here and the windows are so big, they do permit a lot of light to come in, and the orchids do seem to grow pretty well, but I really need to see it, how it reacts over time. Okay, so yeah, I will see that. I have completely forgot to add that when I am watering my orchids lately, I have been adding 1 drop of 520 per liter of water. That is a very light sterilizer, let's say, but it does help a lot to remove any easy bacteria that can be there. So you should check that out too. The roots of my orchids are very happy with that, so once you test that out, you will see it yourself. The orchids do grow very well, so it is not one of those cases that you add a specific compound, like if you put 5 and 20 once a month in the concentration that kills algae, your orchids might not really be very happy. But the solution that I said I'm doing, so 1 drop per liter, it is very low, and the root tips grow very well. You have pretty much seen it yourself. So right, guys, I will wait your questions down in the comment section below, and if you have liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. Thank you very much for watching, and see you all next time. Bye!